Hey everybody, it's Luigi Scarcelli here. Welcome to Friday PM. I'm really excited on this special edition of Friday PM to be out here on Munjoy Hill, beautiful sunlight, looking over the city with my friend actor Cody Evans. Good to see you, Cody.
Nice to be here.
You grew up in Chicago?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Grew up in Chicago, was always kind of into the theater scene there. Went to school for a little bit for film, lost interest, kind of came back to it, and I had a little theater company in Chicago for a little while, and we did a lot of film adaptations on stage. We did we did Reservoir Dogs and Glorious Bastards. The first one we did was The Fly.
Okay.
Jeff Goldblum's The Fly.
Yeah,
and
that's cool.
Did a whole thing and had all the makeup effects and stuff, and then kind of took a little bit of a hiatus, and until recent last 3 years, kind of came back to it.
Yeah, that's exciting. So, and I like that idea that you take a fun existing thing, kind of put your own spin on it a little bit.
Yeah.
That's a little crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you guys try to do like interactive a little bit with the audience?
I don't, but I did a show called Point Break Live, which was very interactive, which started in LA and then went to San Francisco, came to Chicago. I don't know if you know that. They would pick a Keanu Reeves from the audience, and we would give him or her cue cards to read.
Okay.
And they would interact with us. That was extremely interactive. Some of the shows, I was talking about the ones I did in New Orleans, you don't want to be too interactive because there's so many moving pieces, and there's, so we did a thing with Carrie where I was on fire and there's people doing stuff in the water, and so you don't want too much interaction. You want enough audience participation.
Yes,
you want unbridled enthusiasm from the audience.
To have a good time.
Right.
Well, so what's interesting about the Chicago kind of live scene, because it's both really well known for like the improv style of Second City, but also really well known as a great theater city as well.
Yeah.
So that's why it seems like there's a lot of these kind of like pushing the envelope of, wildness where, for example, when I lived in Chicago, I went and saw Tony and Tina's wedding.
Right, yeah.
Which, brings the audience right into it.
Yeah. Very famous at the time,
And that was right next to Second City.
Yeah.
And so, growing up in Chicago, did you go away for school somewhere, or were you doing that in Chicago?
I was doing it in Chicago, So I went to Columbia downtown for a few years, as every kid and person in Chicago typically did for school. Did that. Did some stuff at Second City, but not a lot. Was still trying to find myself. It was different then. When I had gone to Columbia, they were still using Bolex cameras. So we were experimenting with film and cutting film and stuff. And the experience was okay. I think things have changed a little bit, where when I went there wasn't kind of this idea of a collaborative environment. Everyone was kind of on their own, whereas now, I just recently went back to film school in New Orleans. Everyone wants to do something together. And it's a different kind of environment. And I think also that's to do with like being so close to the pipeline of the professional environment of the film scene in New Orleans, where you can go to school, make something, and be very close. And I think it's way more advantageous for people who want to get into the work.
Yeah, I think I also went to film school right at that tail end of when it was still all about actual film and how much the digital revolution changed that so quickly. And it makes it great for all of us filmmakers and actors in every way creatively, which is kind of a funny thing, because right now I was discussing with my co-producer about how we all now kind of have to embrace AI because that's going so fast that in some ways we have to pivot almost as quickly as in about 2003 was like the iMac changed a lot of that, right? And all of a sudden you could edit in a totally different way. And it opened a lot of doors. So were you always interested in the film side of it, or were you kind of bounced on the theater, or the theater was?
Unfortunately, I'm the person that likes it all. I like the film side, I like the writing side, I like the acting side, I like the stunt side, I like the FX side. I like learning about all that stuff. It's one of those mediums where there's just so much going on. You can kind of dip your toes in different things. I think once you feel, if you have a little bit of success performing, you think, well, maybe acting's the way to go. And then the success stops, and you're like, well, maybe the writing is the way to go. I think a lot of the actors that I like and a lot of the artists that I like kind of do everything. And I think that's kind of how I try to set myself up, is to know some different things. And so you bring some different things to the table, and especially in a collaborative environment says, hey, I can write a little bit and I can act a little bit and I can, do this camera for you and things like that. And I'm actually learning how to edit right now, which has been a fun experience. So I think it's important to know everything, but I think down the line, maybe you focus on just a few things.
Right. Well, and as a filmmaker, I also see the same way that a lot of filmmakers also act in their own projects and things, so that it becomes a very specific way, because most people. There's kind of two ways you work through the studio system, right? Historically, or you make your own movie and figure it out. And even now, because those are the auteurs that we've seen at our age, and it's like the 90s, 2000s. Even now, I'm skeptical of the festival side of things, because there's so many festivals and there's so little actual people from the studios, because they have their own pipeline. So it's always like with film, more than anything else other than maybe music, it's so much like such ever-changing landscape where you kind of got to be throwing darts and then moving over here and throwing but it's still always great about collaboration and doing stuff that you enjoy. And I think that's kind of the thing. It's like, if you have that bug for it and you enjoy all those parts of it, that's the most important part. So getting back to kind of the timeline, so you were in Chicago growing up. Then did you go directly to New Orleans, or?
No, I kind of bounced around. I actually came here for about 5 years. I thought it would be a good idea to try to become a police officer, which ended up being a very boring and bad idea.
Yeah, exactly.
And then continued down the first responder route. I went down to New Orleans. I was a firefighter for a couple of years. And started dating somebody who was doing this show, and just kind of got back into the acting thing, and ended up auditioning for an equity show down in New Orleans, got that, and ended up getting reviewed for the first time, really, as an actor, and the reviews are positive, so I kind of was like, hey, let's kind of get back into this. Still a lot of things I need to learn and do. Acting is one of those things where you can all of a sudden be doing really well, and then it just stops, and we had the strike, and then things just kind of fall apart, and then the city dries up. New Orleans is kind of going through their some of their issues right now, where they're not really filming anything right now because of politics. So you have to constantly keep grinding and moving ahead from the acting standpoint. And then I think even more so if you're going to do your own movie. I think everybody wants to do the Sylvester Stallone Rocky approach of like, I'm just going to sit down and make my own movie and do it and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people are doing that, so I think you surround yourself with good quality people, and you just kind of keep moving forward. And I love to act. I adore it. I mean, if I had my druthers, I would just act on stage. It's so much fun to me. But it's hard.
I mean, it is, as I say, ever-changing landscape. And it's a famous story about Sylvester Stallone, which was like his script was the hottest thing in Hollywood. He was not. And they were going to give him any kind of money to have somebody else play it. Famously, James Caan from the Godfather movies, which would have been totally not that good, comparatively.
Interesting.
And then the funny story about that is there's that real life fighter who believes that he stole his life story.
I've heard about that too.
And that guy, and then Liev Schreiber did a movie about him a couple years ago.
I saw that.
And he was the guy who could just always take a lot of beating and keep coming back. But it was, it's always a changing landscape about things. But let's talk about, so you were in New Orleans, but then you're back in Chicago, right? Kind of bounce
around, So I was in New Orleans for a little bit. We were doing some projects and working with some folks, doing some stuff. I was doing these film adaptations that were combining synchronized swimming, water ballet with fights and stunts and things like that. And they were becoming really, really popular. And so we did about 3 shows. Last year we did Evil Dead, which was really good. And then decided to kind of migrate back here for a little bit, and then start working on another project and hopefully get it going in Chicago. I think Chicago was always my destination location. It's kind of a perfect medium and meeting spot in terms of like affordability, and it's not as big as LA, and it's not nearly as big as New York.
Exactly.
And I knew people there, and I think it could be daunting to like, hey, I'm just going to go to LA and try to do. And New York, I can't even imagine. Chicago, it feels more tactile. I can like actually touch things and see people. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Even when I lived in Chicago, the traffic is nowhere nearly, what it is. You can bounce from, because of the way the city is set up along the lake, you can get, in a lot of different directions. And other than that one part of the city at 5 p.m. Where the trains go out to the suburbs, it's not that bad. Los Angeles, real difficult. Real difficult to find pockets in Los Angeles that are even unique or interesting because it's such a newer city. And New York is like just so dense. And I can't even imagine trying to do an independent film there where, everybody's asking them, in any location, hey, can we use your, storefront? Well, how much are you going to pay me?
Exactly.
Right. Chicago still has a lot more of that cool, fun, guerrilla style vibe. And as we were talking about before, I filmed the movie there in 2006, and we filmed it with one of the early kind of camcorder style SD card, as probably like a JVC back in the day, and
you guys were doing it without permits. You were just going out there.
We did everything without permits. We were at an airport with a guy playing like a Middle Eastern terrorist guy getting in the airport. And the cops were just like,
whatever.
What are you guys? And they're kind of like, what? And we were like, sorry, we're leaving. And, and it was nuts. But that was the part about Chicago is, everybody's kind of like, they're not as anxious or uptight as other places. They've kind of seen it all. They just, you can kind of get away with a lot out there. So would you be able to tell the folks a little bit about this upcoming movie?
Absolutely.
Without giving too much away?
Absolutely. So like we were talking earlier, it was inspired from a monologue by the actor Brad Dourif in a movie called The Graveyard Shift, which I'm sure many people have not seen, but I have many times. It's a good little monster movie. And the monologue, it's a serious monologue in a very shticky movie. Actually, the movie's got some really good actors, and Andrew Divoff is in it, who played the Wishmaster. There's some good actors in it. And so, but anyways, he's got this scene, and it's this kind of exterminator who's got severe PTSD of seeing a situation with rats and soldiers in Vietnam. And I go, wow, that would be a really good monologue. So I took that monologue, I used it as an audition piece. And again, I was telling you, I kind of won this little monologue contest and just thought, man, it would be really nice to build on this idea about this exterminator who doesn't do things by the book, a la kind of like a Ghostbuster, but gets the job done, but there's a lot of collateral damage that comes with it. And he's kind of a bumbling guy, but he's also very endearing. And kind of combine that with like a good old-fashioned monster movie in an urban environment. We haven't seen people go into the sewers recently. I miss people going into the sewers with a flare or something. Kind of the movies used to see the Saturday night, horror feature type of a thing. But update it with a little bit more kind of contemporary comedy and just make it fun.
Well, because what's interesting about that is like granted, I don't see all the smaller movies and stuff out there, but it's like when they do come up with those, every once in a while, they're always a hit, like a Cloverfield. There's like a monster movie, or like then Stephen King seems to be doing a lot of stuff on this, but it's always in a small town, like in Maine, where it's the It type of thing.
Pet Cemetery.
It's always the clown and the Pet Cemetery. And so I like that idea because once again, it does play with the idea of people are very scared of like Jaws, where it's the monsters in the water, all those things. So now we don't know, and you're going to have just all kinds of gigantic animals and bugs.
I think we want to get to that point eventually. I think what we're trying to do now with we're doing a proof of concept is kind of use that, actually Jaws, a little bit of power of suggestion, have some stuff, but not show our hand completely, which is actually not that difficult to do with a couple little things, but you kind of going back to it, like you had movies back in the day like Chud and Alligator, and people are terrified of roaches no matter what. And when I was living in New Orleans, the roaches were the size of flip-flops. They were massive, and it doesn't matter how benign they are. They're just, you see them and you freak out. And so in Chicago, there's plenty of roaches. There's plenty of rats.
It's like snakes on a plane, it's that you're claustrophobic, stuck with something like that. Spiders, snakes, bugs of any kind.
Something in the toilet.
That climbs out. And I can see how, because you really could go full out with so many different things, because it could almost be, somewhere where it's just something has set off this chain of events where there's giant rats, giant roaches, giant all these things. And this guy has to, does he enlist other people, or is he a solo guy?
Kind of. Well, I think what ends up happening, it was kind of an allegory on gentrification.
Yes.
This idea that they're doing all this new gentrification in the city, and they're kind of disturbing the ground a little bit.
Right,
you know, and it's kind of got like an environmental thing too.
Stephen King does that with like the Pet Cemetery. Isn't that an Indian burial ground? Kind of disturbing.
Right. We shouldn't be building a giant high rise here because there's something dormant that's living down there. And so, you know, what's funny is that he's kind of like this low-grade exterminator that has the low-grade 3 a.m. infomercial that's really kind of like charming. And he ends up hooking up with a woman who's a reporter who's doing a human rights piece on this gentrification thing. And they kind of hook up, and there's some other characters there. You know, so I'm a huge fan of Aliens, and I love the you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, the female heroine and things like that. So bringing that in there where they kind of pair up, and there isn't really anything romantic about it. They're just kind of doing something to save the day.
And she gets to be the badass female too, in a way.
Right, she gets to be the badass, but it's like, it's all done. It's like almost like he can only do things 85% of the time. and he needs someone to help with 15% of it, you know? And so you just kind of, you kind of follow the different formulas of like Tremors and Ghostbusters and these different jobs and the people they might interact with. And, you know, the idea that we're coming up with is that they're not necessarily like giant, they're like an amalgamation of different roaches, you know? One of the things you see a lot in bug movies is you always see somebody embalmed. There's somebody always embalmed on a wall being saved for later consumption. And that's, you know, using some of those archetypes
exactly,
too. So.
The things that these giant bugs can do. That once again, I think I love the allegory part, and I also love the idea that, as we see with a lot of these kinds of forms, which is like, we see like that we're giant and like the ant, but then we always picture like, what would it be if it was the opposite, where these things are, because they're so ruthless that if they were bigger, it'd be pretty scary.
It's like the Food of the Gods, the movie they made in the 70s. We actually, part of the thing we have with our commercial is that we have kind of like, I don't know if you guys know who, Svengoolie, remember Svengoolie? We kind of had this midnight monster horror host, and they're watching a movie about a giant killer ant. Going over the Midwest, which, you know, so we have these little things here that are foreshadowing what's happening. But all those movies made in the 50s about like Cold War, you know, toxic waste and giant Gila monsters and things like that. Taking some of those too, but making it a little bit more visceral and scary.
Visceral, exactly. It's something, you know, that right now is back in play, I think, a lot. Exactly, with like the Terrifier movies.
I was just going to mention that,
where they've been talking about that a lot, because it's like practical effects, very, you know, harsh, pulls no punches. It's not trying to be wishy-washy about some of that stuff. And what I think is interesting about a lot of that is that it's like, again, it's there's just so many different character archetypes. And with the history of horror film, which I studied at one point, you know, as you already can kind of attest to, they're always about something else. And a lot of times they have a lot of interesting politics to them. So the gentrification thing works really well. If you look at more modern films like Jordan Peele's Get Out, he's doing reversal of a lot of the kind of outsider roles and a lot of those. And so it's interesting that it's, because right now, I mean, that's pertains very much to New Orleans, very much to Chicago. Now, you'll film in Chicago, but am I guessing, is it going to take place in New Orleans? Or you're not really sure what city?
I don't know. I mean, you know, I would love for it to just take place in Chicago. I think it's just, I think what it does, again, the city lends itself to kind of a cold, I mean, I wouldn't say Chicago's just cold, just naturally weather-wise, and you know, but it's not necessarily sterile, but it definitely has, I think, that industrial aspect of it, of alleyways and sewers. And I mean, you can go in Chicago, you and I can walk down the street, and if we saw a sewer grate, we could pop that sucker open and go down there. We're not gonna, we would kind of get away with that, you know what I mean? So there's still elements of that in Chicago, even the neighborhoods that are kind of coming up. But when I was growing up, you know, everything was really dirty and dingy, and I just have a big memory of just everything being wet and scary in a city, and you know, and so kind of bringing that back as well. And so New Orleans is equally scary. And then Sinners, they filmed Sinners down there, which has made $1 gazillion. But I also think it's like, you know, New Orleans has its own thing. It's got its own way of like ghost stories and the way that they do stuff.
And if you don't follow that vibe.
Yeah.
There's a, I assume, and I'm speaking for you, but I'm assuming, because New Orleans, then you'd want to have that New Orleans vibe.
Right.
And you want to have the Chicago vibe.
The Chicago
it's a little
vibe.
less like Sinners,
Yeah.
which I haven't seen, but I saw some of the previews.
Yeah.
Because it has that, there's a certain thing, a difference. And so Chicago, right, it's just more gritty.
Yeah.
Again, it's like what you're saying with New York could be an alternative place, but New York is just such a headache, where Chicago, because it's such a big city, and I can attest as being around there, it's like, you could find just some closed down whole water treatment center or something, just wander around.
Factory. Yeah. I mean, you could still get on the train if you wanted to in Chicago, if you were smart, and shoot stuff on the train. And get away with it. Now you might be going into an area you probably wouldn't want to bring film equipment to, but you still would kind of get away with it. But and I think that's what's great about New Orleans, Chicago, Baltimore, St. Louis. They all have their own thing. They all have their own flair to it. And Chicago, the last time we kind of had a horror monster movie in Chicago was The First Child's Play. So it's kind of like, let's go back and kind of, they've been doing enough of the Dick Wolf stuff in Chicago. Let's add some more stuff.
Everything about cops and PD and all those
Chicago
things.
Streets and Sanitation.
Exactly. And it's, to me, what I like about a lot of that stuff is, as a guy who grew up there, not only do you have like the idea of what the flavor of it'll be, but also you can navigate as a producer in ways that if you were an outside person, you might not know. Okay, we can get just about this far and stay out of harm's way or different things. And it's such an interesting city of how, without knowing that kind of mental roadmap, it's because it's crazy. Some of the parts that you would think are going to be really okay are wild and crazy. It's all over the place. I mean, there's certain different directions to go in. So you're working on this is something for maybe this next year? Or
I mean, we do have, I finished the script. Actually, I finished the second draft yesterday. I sent it to the director, working with a gentleman who has a company called Paper Star Productions in Chicago, him and his partner, and they've done some features. And so I sent him the script. We have the investors, and the investors are going to be meeting with them next week. And if all goes well, start shooting in early fall, or you know what I mean, and then post-production will take however long it takes.
To get it right.
So and of course this is a filmmaker. You might have reshoots, you might have this, you might have that. It's an interesting thing too. Is to kind of, like you said, working with actors. You might lose an actor, might need to bring an actor back, and then you can't because they're gone. And the gentleman Josh, who has this company, also has a studio in Chicago, is very competent at building sets and special effects. Really lucky in that regard.
That's cool.
Kind of has that old school. He's kind of like the guy that would have done the matte painting for like The Thing. You know what I mean? Like, who did that matte painting of The Thing? It's like Josh can do that, or who built half of the creature in The Fly? Josh can do that. So really lucky to have that. So hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll start shooting in the fall.
Awesome. Okay. So can you tell everybody out there, how to get in touch with you, even if there isn't a website yet for the film, or maybe there is, to reach you and get updates on everything?
We're going to be starting a website soon. We're kind of still working on it as we form the company, but obviously you can reach me by email, ghostdog06@yahoo. Always open to answer questions, talk about horror. That's kind of like one of my passions. Love horror, love talking film, and we're just super excited to get this thing going.
And are you on Instagram as a?
I'm not on Instagram right now. That's one of the.
Took a break from the social media.
Yeah, one of the things I'm not very good at doing is social media, which my sister's actually going to be helping us out with that. She's going to be helping with Instagram. So I'm Facebook and Cody Evans on Facebook.
Cody Evans on Facebook.
Yeah, on Facebook. And again, like when it comes to art, love talking art. Love going over anything artistic, especially in the horror film genre.
Well, look him up on that email, ghostdog06
at Yahoo.
And will you come back after you've wrapped the production and tell us how it went?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to come back.
Right?
Bring you a poster.
That'd be awesome.
A signed poster.
Well, thank you so much,
Thank you,
Cody.
Luigi. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back, guys. Thanks a lot.